What's going on, everybody? Welcome to another 60 feet 6 inches, your fantasy baseball home over at fakepigskin.com. I'm your host, Kyle Robert. You can follow me on Twitter at NotoriousKRO. With me once again is Ben Rolfe. What's up, Ben?
Not much, Kyle. It's been a pretty crappy weekend from a sports point of view. So I've watched my England cricket team lose, my England rugby team lose, and you informed me that my football team also lost, despite me not actually watching them. So it's been a pretty crappy weekend, and the Winter Olympics also finished. So I'm in a bit of a dead spot now. So it's all on the baseball ship.
Yeah, I was watching baseball on MLB Network, which is exciting, and then I got to watch Manchester United win 2-1, so that was nice. And you might notice on our screen we got the return of Damian Dabrowski. What's up, Damian?
Nice to be back. It's been a while. Of course, now that I'm not on regularly, I actually went out and got a new chair. We finally put that. I think we got some closure, accepting the WD-40 sponsorship was not coming. Yeah, my stability ball deflated, so that wasn't really an option either. So we have to go out and get a real chair. So as usual, things are making perfect sense.
I do appreciate you getting a whole chair instead of just a little bit of WD-40 for this week.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that's nice. That's nice.
Lots of features on this one too. I don't really know what they all do because I didn't read the instruction. Manual, but there's
how many features can you really have on a chair though? Like it leans forward, it leans back.
Go in like 3 different directions. Like if they go up, they go to the side. They're like Lamborghini door armrests. There's like extra pieces that I'm hoping I wasn't supposed to put on, but I don't know. So time will tell. Yeah, if I just collapse in the middle of the show, you know why.
He just disappears.
You do gotta love when you put stuff together and there's like 4 extra screws and like a brace, and you're like, I don't know, doesn't go. Oh god, it's good to have you back. Damian will be reappearing from time to time, and we're actually scheduled to talk catchers this week. And since Ben loves catchers so much, he's agreed to sit this one out. And Damian and I will go deep. We'll get into your top 50 or so catchers and your backups and the backups of the backups, and we'll be talking that. So check for that midweek on YouTube as well as on our iTunes feed. But let's jump into it. Today we're going to talk shortstop. But before we do, JD Martinez, Ben, we kind of hinted around it. It seemed like it was inevitable. And right as we finished last weekend, he signed with the Boston Red Sox. I guess, what was your initial reaction when you saw the signing?
So just to sort of clarify, he has sort of semi-signed, but they've not finalised the deal just because there's a little bit of an injury concern. It's not a present thing. It's more of a consideration for the future. So I think it's probably working around like the language of the future sort of cuts that they can do with him. But it looks like they're going to complete it. But from a fantasy point of view, it looks fantastic because at the moment he's come in and he looks set to play DH. With Eduardo Nunez and Brock Holt in the team, it doesn't look like there'll be any need for him to go out to the outfield, even when they want to rest those guys. The worst that I can see is he might have to play first base. So all of a sudden, we're looking at a guy he struggled to stay on the field. All of a sudden, he's going to be on the field probably for 140 to 150 games. I mean, you can look at injuries and say that not all injuries. We had this debate about Ryan Braun on the Twitter feed this week, and Damian was saying that Ryan Braun's injuries wouldn't have been solved by him playing first base. Well, JD Martinez, most of his injuries are just due to the fact that he can't quite work out how to run in the outfield. So the fact he doesn't have to do any running other than sort of on the base paths is going to be great. And it means we can project him for, like I say, in that 140 to 150 game range. It means I feel confident he's going to be 35, close to 40 home runs. And there's every possibility hitting either third or fourth in that lineup, depending on where he settles, that we could be looking at 190, 200 combined runs and RBI. We could absolutely be looking at a top 5 outfielder here and a guy you could conceivably consider taking at the end of the first round.
Yeah, he's definitely. I love where he's going. I like the park. I like the team that's obviously around him. Damian, I guess for you, is he a guy that can challenge for, say, top 20 overall player?
I definitely think he's in that conversation. I have him as my 6th outfielder right now, right between Stanton and Judge. And like Ben, I think it's totally fine to take him at the end of the first. I think more so in a 15-team league. I think in a 10 or 12, he's probably at least you can most likely get him probably mid-second. even late second in some scenarios, depending on when those pitchers go and such. But I don't think that, like you said, we knew the move to Boston was most likely going to happen. So I think in terms of projections and rankings and things like that, he's kind of, we were working with that information already, so we don't really have to make much of an adjustment. Um, Obviously, in the second half last year, he had that ridiculous home run rate, which is, it's unsustainable. But I think we have enough of a track record with him now that we know that's a skill that he's proven and he owns now. But the one thing with Martinez, if you remember a lot of those home runs, he's terrific at going into the opposite field, which in Chase Field wasn't a problem for a right-handed hitter in Fenway. It's tough to hit oppo homers in Fenway, for a righty. So now that's the.
I was say a lot of doubles off that wall.
Right. Well, in left and right, but I mean in right, it's also like, it could help his average a little bit. There is a lot of room out there. But I do think that might be the one thing where I think people might think, oh, now he's going to Fenway. Fenway has the short wall and left. He's suddenly going to hit even more homers. I don't necessarily think that's going to happen. I think maybe it could help as a batting average a little bit, obviously getting hits off the monster, or using kind of all that space in center and right. But I'm not adjusting him, too much up or down on this move. I think it's going to be comparable to kind of, once you adjust for the crazy hot stretch in the second half last year, what you would normally expect to get from him.
Yeah, I think mixed in with Stanton and Judge is kind of perfect for where Martinez. I think those three guys will be kind of quick order in most drafts. Ben, I guess you could have did a write up for Fake Pigskin that I was reading through. I thought was really good, but the Hanley Mitch Moreland kind of situation is very interesting, and all of a sudden, like in most leagues, these guys become players that I don't know that I'm really like excited to own or going out of my way to target.
Yeah, well, it's interesting because this week I've read reports and I've seen the flip on Roster Resource this week that now it's no longer going to be a platoon. It's going to be Hanley as the kind of everyday first baseman and Moreland kind of spelling him rather than anything else. So if that's the way it looks like it's playing out as the season gets closer, then 100% Hanley becomes an interesting play. Unfortunately, in definitely ESPN, I'm not sure about the other formats, he's only DH only eligible. So that's a bit of a drawback to his value. But if he looks like being the everyday first baseman, there is value there. But it looks more likely that it's going to be a kind of like at best a 66-33 kind of split, and it's going to make it hard to own either of them.
Yeah, and Damian, we and Ben were talking about kind of the whole situation. We were talking second baseman with Nunez coming in, Pedroia. We don't really know when he's going to come back. Do you have concerns kind of across the infield that there could be some playing time issues with a lot of these guys?
Yeah, absolutely. I think aside from Bogarts, there's really not a single spot on that infield where I think you can, lock a guy in for 145, 150 games. Ben mentioned the platoon at first. We'll see how that goes. If Hanley can stay healthy. I know he's on that TB12 diet now, so got all the voodoo doctors with him. So we'll see. But, even with like somebody like Devers at third, obviously they're looking at him as kind of the future third baseman there, but it is still a pretty small sample size from last year. We'll see if he can play regularly against lefties. And then with Nunez at second, I mean, I've seen conflicting reports on Pedroia. I mean, at first it was looking like he was going to be out a while. Now there's people saying he could be back within the first couple of weeks. I think the one problem for Nunez, obviously the fact that he can kind of play anywhere in the infield, really, aside from first probably, and even in the outfield, for that matter, I think helps him get in the lineup. But at the same time, I think Pedroia, despite the fact that he's not a very good player anymore, and it looks like they're at least going to move him to the bottom of the order now instead of just continuing to bat him second or lead off or so. But just kind of what he means to that franchise and kind of how Boston fans view him, I think it's going to be really difficult for them to not play him if he says he's healthy enough to play. It's a little bit like the David Wright situation. I guess in Wright's case, he just hasn't been able to get on the field, but it's one of those things where if he can get on the field, I would see the Mets playing him, even if, he literally can't do anything that's going to help the team. And I don't know if Pedroia is at that point yet, but I'm just a little bit worried that even if Nunez is looking like the better player, unless Pedroia has a setback or so, it could be hard for him to get regular at bats. And the contract he got really was a little bit lower than a lot of people were expecting. So I don't think that's going to put any pressure on the team to play him, such as if he had gotten a bigger deal.
Yeah, yeah, I'm with you. Especially early, I think if Pedroia looks, if he's healthy, I think they'll expect him to be out there. Maybe as we approach September, they'll get a little more controlling with who plays when and all that good stuff. It will be interesting to kind of monitor all this stuff. It will be interesting to see how Devers does out of the gate. Because if Devers struggles a little bit, they throw Nunez over at third, and they kind of mix things in. They could definitely. They definitely have pieces to move around, and they're always going to be a team that'll be active at the deadline. So we'll have to keep an eye on them throughout the spring and early part of the year. As Florida just kind of retracts baseball and gets rid of all their good players, the Tampa Bay Rays traded Steven Souza to the Arizona Diamondbacks. Ben, I guess what were your initial thoughts, and is Souza a guy that you're interested in for 2018?
He was initially when he first went, because the kind of projections were he was going to hit sort of third or fourth in that lineup, and everything kind of looked like he could contribute in four categories. It's just average that he's gonna weigh you down in. But since then, he slipped a little bit into fifth, and I've even seen people talk about him being sixth in the lineup as spring training's open. So a lot of his interest nearer the year is going to be where he bats, because if he slips down the order a little bit, that's going to hurt those runs and RBI totals. But definitely where you can get him kind of in those later rounds of drafts, he's a guy I'm targeting, just simply because it's so rare to find a guy that can give you both 20 plus home runs and 10 to 15 steals, and he's one of those guys. So it looks likely he will be the one out of the three who is safest. Like him and Pollock are likely to be the safest two outfielders there, and the other spot is going to be the one that rotates. So that'll be interesting to see. I know there was a lot of reaction about him going there and the humidor, and I mean, yeah, it would be better if he was going there without the humidor, but I still think Souza in Arizona is going to be a more fearsome prospect than Souza in Tampa Bay. He might lose some runs on RBI just because he would have hit straight slap bang at number 3 or 4 in the middle of that order, but he is going to lose. Like, instead of projecting him for 30 home runs, you might project him for 25, something like that. Just knock off a couple of home runs for that kind of factor. But there was some talk that he'd gone from Tampa Bay to a worse hitting park, and I think that's taking it too far. And if that narrative sticks in the industry and in drafts, Sousa's going to be a great value, because he's going to drop out of the top 200 draft picks, and if that happens, I'm going to be getting him in every draft.
Yeah, the humidor talk is kind of interesting. I've at first I didn't think it would be that big of a deal. Now I'm reading some stuff. I've kind of come around a little bit more to it having an impact. I don't think it's going to be the massive drop that a lot of people think, but I definitely think we'll notice it. And I like Souza. I think the fact that he can contribute with the speed helps kind of keep his numbers and keep his kind of production level up where it needs to be. The Rays also lost Brett Honeywell, who looks like he's headed for Tommy John after injuring his UCL. So, Damian, I think we just get rid of baseball in Florida. Just like we'll have them come for spring, and then after that, no more baseball teams in Florida.
Relegate them.
Yeah, just all of them.
Maybe call up some minor league teams. Yeah, it's a little bit of a mess down there. Looking at roster resource, looking at the Marlins, actually, I saw their projected starting left and right fielders were Martin Prado and Derek Dietrich, neither of which I was aware even knew where the outfield was. So it's not a good situation if you're a baseball fan in Florida. Luckily, you have 28 other teams or so that you can root for. So we'll see. I mean, as it pertains to Souza, I think I'm largely indifferent on him. This doesn't really change too much for me. I have him as my 44th outfielder right now, right in between Brett Gardner and Kyle Schwarber, a couple spots behind the likes of Jay Bruce and Nomar Mazara. So just as some context there. But, again, I think the humidor effect is negated by the fact that he's already coming from a pretty bad hitting environment in Tampa, like Ben mentioned. So, we can't really knock him for that as if he was coming from, Coors or something like that. So, that should be fine. And I do think the Diamondbacks will run definitely more than the Rays did. So hopefully we can see that steal number, approach 20 again, like it did last season. And the playing time, I mean, we'll see. I would feel safer if they just moved on from Tomas already. Right now, between him and Dyson, it seems like they kind of have 5 outfielders that, if they're on the roster, you would think are going to be seeing some playing time. The other concern is, I think, well, with Pollock, it's going to be injury, but they obviously can't platoon Dyson with David Peralta since they're both lefties. So, that would be the one concern there, that Souza and Pollock are the 2 righties. And between the 2 of them, assuming Pollock's not hurt, I'd expect Souza to lose more at bats. But even so, I think that's going to be more of like a defensive switch or pinch running late game situation. They're obviously not going to be bringing Dyson in, for his bat. So I think the at bats should be safe. And I think anywhere between that 35 and 50 outfielder range, really, you can move them up or down as you see fit.
Yeah, the Dyson kind of becoming more of a late game swap, pinch runner kind of position instead of actually having an ability to play a handful of days a week is definitely gone. It'll be interesting to see if they make some moves. And just throwing Kyle Schwarber as barely a top 50 outfielder is definitely something after last season. So
I'm sure Ben enjoys that.
Ben told you last year. I don't know that you said that he was going to be.
I didn't own him anyway, so at least I had that.
Yeah. But yeah, it's definitely what a difference a year makes. But let's talk shortstop. So I'm going to read through the consensus. We get this off of Fantasy Pros. So Trey Turner, Carlos Correa, Francisco Lindor, Corey Seager, Elvis Andrus, Alex Bregman, Xander Bogaerts, Gene Segura, and Trevor Story is kind of the consensus top 9. Ben, I guess of the 9, is there a name that according to your rankings, you're either much higher on or much lower on than the consensus?
Probably the guy is Bregman. He's the person that ranks sort of 2 spots differently for me, compared to everyone else who's kind of 1 spot here or there, and it kind of bounces around where I rank Bregman. It's just simply the fact that I think that it's very difficult with those sort of 3 guys. I could argue them in any order, I really could. But with Bregman, it's just simply the fact that he does offer you that kind of what Lindor offers, in that he can offer 20-ish to 20-plus home runs, but he can also give you 15 to 20 steals as well, and that kind of sets him apart from Seager, because I value the sort of 16 steals over the 4 or 5 steals more than I value the 305 average, just simply because I think steals are so rare that it's going to be hard. And also Bregman is going to hit right near the top of that lineup, which is just going to boost his runs over Seager. So that's kind of why he jumps up from, I think it's 6th in the consensus, and I've got him 4th. So again, Bregman, Seager, and Andrus are all in a tier together, but I would just take Bregman first out of the 3.
Damian, what about you? Are you in on Bregman being kind of the guy that probably should move up in the consensus?
Yeah, I actually have it the same way as Ben does. I have Bregman 4, Seager 5, and then Andrew 6. So no changes there. I think this is a position though that I think it kind of ends there with Story, but honestly, I can't really make a good argument for why Story is much better than Didi Gregorius, who I have at number 10. And I also don't really, Bogaerts was a guy that, last year I had a lot of shares of and I thought could really make that jump to being in that elite tier of shortstops, and it just didn't happen. And the price has dropped down a little bit this year, but I don't know. Obviously, he's still young enough where we can see it, but he's certainly not a guy that I'm going to be aggressively going after this year. And really, neither is Segura. Which I guess what I'm saying is, if you don't end up grabbing one of those, I have the top 3 as one tier, and then Bregman and Seager as their own tier, and then Andrews being the start of that 3rd tier that goes all the way through Paul DeJong at number 12 for me. So the way I'm looking at that position is, if I'm not getting really, I don't think I'm going to own Seager. He's just not a player that really fits the way I'm trying to build my roster. So if I don't get either Turner, Correa, Lindor, or Bregman, chances are I'm probably just waiting on the position really towards kind of that 15 to 20 range, where I can get a guy that I'm going to, be able to tailor to whether I'm looking for speed, whether I'm looking for power at that point. So that's really kind of my overview on shortstop right now.
Yeah, I'm
So
kind of.
we weren't going to talk about him in this podcast, but I'm just really interested because you might not be with us when we talk about the deeper guys, Damien. What
Hmm.
do you see Paul de Jong doing this year? Just because you've put him in that tier with Andrus and Bogarts, I'm a lot more circumspect on him. He's gonna fall in right around my sort of top 20. He's going to be in a massive kind of tier. So my tier is Story, Baez, Marwin Gonzalez, and Didi Gregorius. So 9 through 12. Then I've got a massive tier that includes names like Simeon, Arcia, Anderson, Polanco, Tim Beckham, Zach Kozar, Addison Russell, Paul de Jong, and Jose Peraza. So all guys with a lot of upside and could be key contributors for you. But I don't see de Jong standing out from that crowd. But is it just you're rooting for upside? I know you're a big upside like targeter.
Hmm. No, that's a good point, and honestly, Ben, you're probably right. I don't think it's fair to really put De Jong and Andrews and Bogarts in the same tier. The way I kind of just broke it up is I wanted, once we got past the top two tiers, I just tried to stretch it out a little bit because I found it difficult when I was making like 3 and 4 player tiers, for that to be as kind of as useful a tool when I'm drafting. So he's definitely, while I included him in that tier, it's more so because I think he stands out more from the few guys I have behind him, than he is comparable to Andrews and Bogarts, which are the top of that tier. And my thing with De Jong is I just think that, especially when you're comparing to somebody like Trevor Story, unless you think Story's going to run a lot more than we've really seen from him and becomes a 15 to 20 steal guy, I think it's clear with De Jong that he's going to have, I don't think his playing time should be pretty safe, with the Cardinals for the moment. And I think he's a guy that obviously, is not going to give you very much in batting average, but he's a guy that should hit 25 homers if he stays their shortstop for the majority of the season. And that's kind of what brought me to bring him out from some of the guys I have behind him. Once you get into like Jorge Polanco, Marcus Semien, and things like that, where I just think that his power is a more bankable trait than the traits of those guys behind him, even if they're in different categories.
Yeah, I
Makes
don't
a lot
know.
of sense.
I guess for this position, for me, like it's very top heavy, and then it's a lot of just like I know that we're talking. You have a clear definition of your kind of your Andrews, Bogarts, Segura tier to Marwin Gonzalez, Polanco, Arcia, and but even like with the De Young convo we just had, it seems like there's just kind of a group of like even 15 guys that if you end up with a couple of them, you'll be pretty happy. And like you said, if you're tailoring your draft, oh, I need speed or I need power, you'll be able to find kind of a guy that kind of fits that mold. A lot of these guys are, either 20 and 10 in terms of homers and steals, or 10 homers and 20 steals. It just kind of depends on what you want. But for me, it's like either grab one of the top three or just be real patient. Damian, if we're assuming Manny Machado gets eligibility, some leagues it'll be 10 games, some leagues it'll be 20, whatever it is. If, say, he becomes shortstop eligible, where does he kind of fit for you amongst the other shortstop?
He'd be my number 3 guy behind Turner and Correa, and right before Lindor and Bregman. I think it's close with Correa. I certainly can't, if you prefer Machado to Correa, I'm not going to, vehemently disagree with you there. I can see that happening. My reasoning for having Correa first right now is I like their lineup a little bit better. And I think that as it relates to speed, which is what we kind of saw Machado's big year was the year he stole 20 bases. And then, of course, last year he stopped running. With him, the steals were the outlier. That was the one season he actually ran. Whereas with Correa, last year where he didn't run was the outlier. And prior to that, we had always seen a little bit of speed in his game. So between the two of them, I think if I had to say who's more likely to start running again, I would say Correa. Now, that's not saying I'm projecting Correa for a lot of stolen bases. I think I have him for somewhere around 8 or 10. So I don't think he's going to be a 20 steal guy again. But I'd be less surprised by it than I would be by Machado going back to that. And I think they're obviously very close in some of the other categories. So that's really the difference for me as it stands right now.
Yeah, I'm 100% with you. I think with him and Lindor, I kind of go back and forth on kind of what I expect out of the two. He'd definitely be in that top 4. He'd be a guy that I'd be comfortable grabbing and putting there. Lindor is a guy that I don't know what to do with him because he's a guy that's shown kind of the ability to kind of be 20 and 20. He's also like last year where he brought a lot more power and a few less steals, and his average came down a little bit. So I'm not sure what I'd want to do with him, but yeah, it'd definitely be in that conversation. Ben, what about you? Where are you at with Machado if he becomes eligible?
So kind of in the same range. I mean, it's horrifying that we're all agreeing with each other. I hate this. This has never happened before. And if Damian's going to start agreeing with us, he has to go away again.
I just needed a couple months off apparently.
Yeah, and then we all became friends again. That's weird. But I kind of agree. It's that range. It's not. He's not. They're neither of them are in front of Turner, but I might just slide him in front of Correa, just simply because Machado he actually had more steals last year. He had 9 steals. So I do think the steals are pretty much a wash. I just want to bank on Machado playing a little bit more because we've now seen 3 full seasons out of him, whereas we obviously saw the broken season last year from Correa, and by no means should that give him the injury-prone tag. But that definitely is where I am. I will happily take Machado either side. I might just bump Machado just simply because, and I know I differ from you two guys here, I value that multi-position eligibility. And I wrote a lot about Machado and why I think he's better than Donaldson this week.
Yeah. And I wrote why you're wrong.
You wrote and defended Donaldson. Yeah, but it doesn't happen. So you're wrong. So it's quite simple. So I can defend Machado, and I really like that eligibility. I really like that ability to switch between. I like the ability to play the waiver wire and pick up either the hot shortstop or the hot third baseman. So I'm going to go with Machado. But you brought up Lindor, and he really intrigues me because the question of which Lindor we're going to see this year is one that's really making it difficult for me. He kind of, at the moment, I flip-flopped about half a dozen times between putting him in my top tier with those 2/3, or switching him down into the Bregman tier. And he's almost in a tier on his own, but I know what Damian's saying. If you put him in a tier on his own, the tier kind of becomes pointless because it doesn't help you know when to take him if he's in a tier on his own. So I went with the Bregman tier just simply because I expect him to sort of split the difference in the home runs. I expect it to come down to around 24, 25. I think he'll sit around 15, 16 steals, and I think the average will split the difference. And I'm not quite sure that's going to be enough to make him stand out from Bregman and Seager. So I'm going to sit with him there, and that's going to definitely push him down more into sort of the middle of the second round for me, whereas Turner, Correa, and Machado are all going to be absolutely locked first-round picks for me.
Damian, where are you at with Lindor? Do you think he's a guy, we saw him go 33 homers, but his average, took a dip last year down to 273. The year prior, he was only 15 homers, but he was hitting, he had hit 300 the 2 previous seasons with, around 12, 15 home runs. Do you think Lindor is kind of evolving and becoming a guy that we should project for more like 25 to 30 with a lower average? Or do you think that average comes back and maybe the power numbers dip a little bit?
My concern with Lindor and where you take him is basically I think the people that take Lindor probably are valuing are looking at shortstop scarcity and are valuing being able to have a top tier guy at that position. Because my issue with Lindor, and it seems like a weird thing to criticize, but I'm not criticizing him as a player. I'm saying more so relative to the options you have in the first 2 rounds. Is obviously the benefit with him is that he is a 5-category contributor to some extent. The difference is that if you look at some of those other guys that you're hoping can contribute in 5 categories in that range, they almost all have an elite skill, even within that 5-category contribution, at least relative to Lindor. For instance, Charlie Blackmon, right? He's another 5-category guy, but Blackmon can hit 30 homers. Mm-hmm. He's also going to hit 315. He has hit over, I think, 300 the last 2 years. Whereas the batting average floor is a little bit lower for Lindor. So when you don't really have an elite skill in any of those 1 categories, if he does have the down year in batting average, or if he doesn't run as much 1 year and gives you 14 steals instead of 25, it's really going to hurt his overall impact because he doesn't have that 1 category that's going to stand out. So that's kind of why it's nice to get that base kind of early in your draft. You're also kind of have to be very cognizant that now you have to either continue building on all those categories evenly, or if you start taking guys that are one-trick ponies or just power guys, then you're going to have to be chasing the other categories. Whereas if you take a Stanton or a Judge or some of the other players that are going middle second round or so, that are kind of more more prominent in that one category, you at least know going forward, that now you can take somebody who helps you somewhere else as opposed to Lindor.
Yeah, I'm looking
I have to say, sorry, Damien. That's what you're talking about. There is where I am with my keeper league at the moment. Is I started with a very balanced load of keepers, and my first few picks kept it quite balanced. And now I'm finding myself looking at it, going, well, which way do I go? Do I risk taking Cameron Maybin and risking a big dot in the steals, in the speed, in the power, in order to get the steals, or do I look at someone like Eugenio Suarez, who might give me 25, 30 home runs, but could give me a dot at the speed? And I'm kind of in that stick or twist situation where I've got to choose which direction I go. It's a slow draft, so I get plenty of time to change my mind, and I do a lot. I don't know which way now to go. And you're right, it's nice to have that balance early on because it does give you the flexibility to take the draft as it comes. But it does also create quite a lot of headaches because you always have to be thinking a couple of rounds ahead in terms of, if I take the power guy now, where do I get my speed? If I sacrifice average now, where do I find average? And that's the tough thing. I do agree with you. It's the one thing that I like about Lindor, but at the same time, drafting him puts you in that tricky position in the middle rounds where you're not quite sure what to prioritize. And that's where what we discussed last week, Carl, about having rough targets to aim for really helps you, because you can have a couple of rounds of power and say, right, now I know last year was won with, let's say, 350 home runs. I'm now at 320. I don't need to chase power. I will find those extra home runs in the course of the season. And then you start to chase speed. That's where that kind of comes in. You've got to be very solid in your draft plan if you start with someone like Francisco Lindor. I do agree.
Yeah. And then kind of the next, I guess, chunk of players, is it really dependent for you guys on kind of how your draft is going, and depending on who you take? So maybe, we got Elvis Andrus, we got Gene Segura. Like, so, do you need speed? Do you need power? Or are they both kind of, interchangeable depending, where you get them in the draft?
Well, they're it's funny that we talk about Lindor because I'd almost say those are guys that if you take a player like Lindor, you can almost kind of fall back on. It doesn't make sense because they're the same position, but they are also fairly balanced in that they don't really have a standout category. So if you can't kind of seem to choose a direction and you don't feel like there's a pure power option or a pure speed option that is worth kind of that spot in the draft, you can kind of try to continue to build on that balance and just not create a deficit for yourself. Or, also if you kind of do it the other way and say, if you start with somebody like Trey Turner and you're like, okay, I have all these steals. Now in the second round, you can go for a pure power guy, or if you get a bounce guy, then you go for Rhys Hoskins or something like that in the third or fourth. And you're kind of alternating power speed. And then you get to, the sixth or seventh round and you're like, well, I can take Bogarts or I can take Segura. And, they'll give me some average. They'll give me some steals. They'll give me runs. They're homers. They're not big home run hitters, but, it's not D Gordon. They're not going to hit 5. So those are guys that can kind of, it's weird. It's not an exciting pick, but it's almost a pick that kind of holds you over towards another round or two until you get a more obvious need on your team. So I don't think I'll probably be in this range very often, just the way my drafts are going to work out, where I'm either really going high at shortstop or waiting even longer. I just think you have to understand what you're getting when you draft those guys.
Yeah, I think that's fair. Ben, are you kind of in the same boat?
Yeah, it's difficult with those three, and Andrus and Segura are kind of the main two I'm looking at, and I'm always going to go Andrus over Segura just because I feel like Andrus's floor is a little bit safer than Segura's. I mean, I was just about to sort of ask about the power and say, can someone in his mid-30s repeat that power? And then I realized he's 29 and he's been playing in the majors since he was 19, and he's never played less than 145 games, and he did that as a 19-year-old. I mean, the safety with Andrus is just incredible. And I mean, I feel like even I last year hit Andrus over the head about the fact that he's just this safe, boring 20 kind of steal kind of guy. And then all of a sudden he exploded. I'm never going to forget the argument of Cesar Escobar versus Elvis Andrus. It makes me.
I didn't want to bring it up. That I was going to spare you. Wait till the post, but you went there yourself.
It makes me shudder to think that I made that argument. But Elvis Andrus, if he can get even 15 home runs, I mean, this year, even if we expect some drop off, he hit 8 in 2016, he hit 20 in 2017. So 14 or 15 is not unreasonable. And if he can do that and still put up the 20 steals, he's going to be a really valuable contributor to you. But I can see what Damian's saying. At that point in the draft, it's going to be a case of, are they the best player available? And they're going to have to both slip a little bit for me to want to take them where they're going to be valued, because I'm going to look at that big tier that we talked about, and I'm going to think, well, I could just gamble on one of those guys in the next 10, 15 rounds rather than lock in Andrus and Segura. For me, if I'm going to take one, it's going to be Andrus, but it's going to be tight. And again, I'm probably going to stay away, but if the value's right, I will look to snap one of them up in the sort of middle roundish, wherever they're going. I'll have the ADP. I'll keep an eye on it. If they start to slip, I might just jump in and grab one, just because it'll make me feel good at shortstop. But in my keeper league, I've gone the other way. There was a lot of shortstops kept, a lot went off the board early. I'm now just sitting and waiting, and I've got Machado, so I've stacked up at third base. I'm going to just draft a late shortstop. If he hits well, he'll stay on my team. If he doesn't, I can just drop him and slide Machado over there. So that's kind of where I am at the position in terms of the top end. What I want to know from you guys is, I'm obviously really interested in Bogaerts. He was a guy I was going to target coming into this year. I know, Damian, you targeted him last year. He rounds out this tier for me with Andrus and Segura. But my concern is that he's now projected to hit sixth, below Rafael Devers. I know we talked about Devers potentially struggling, and that could happen. But even so, he's going to hit fifth. And a lot of Bogaerts' kind of value came from him hitting sort of second, third in that lineup with those guys around him. If he's going to hit fifth or sixth, is he all of a sudden now slipping closer to the Trevor Story kind of group than he is the guys ahead of him? Because he again isn't a guy that offers any one particular great skill.
No, I totally agree. I think that's a very good point. When he did have 2 years ago, when he had that really strong second half, that was kind of what happened. Is obviously that was that outlier for the Red Sox where Mookie Betts had the amazing season, and it just as David Ortiz was still in that lineup, and just the counting stats for really the top half of their order was just insane. And when Bogaerts was sitting close to 300, that was the thing, is he was scoring so many runs, and he was getting so many opportunities. And obviously the lineup has is not as strong as it was that 1 year. It's still a good lineup, but when I think. And I don't know if it was Todd Zola or somebody brought this up, but the thing with Andrus is he has a ton of soft contact. He's not a guy that usually has a very strong hard hit rate. And you see a lot of the hits he does get, even when he's going well, are just grounders through the hole or kind of short, not even line drives, but just kind of in between the outfielder and the infield, which is fine. They all count the same, but it's hard to see that translating into a player who's going to have a 25 homer season all of a sudden. So if we're looking at his ceiling, at least for the foreseeable future, as being kind of low teen home runs, and we know that he's not going to get the runs scored that he would have if he was at the top of the lineup. Maybe he'll get a few more RBI chances, but again, not being a power hitter, he's going to be scoring a lot of those, driving in a lot of guys with singles, doubles, things like that. And we don't know how much he's going to run. So I do think kind of that move in the lineup brings him down a little bit in almost every category. I still would have him. I think it's close with Segura. I would definitely still have him over Trevor Story. But I get what you're saying, and I think it hurts his upside. I think his floor is still relatively strong across the board, but it's tough to see a breakout coming in that spot.
Yeah, no, I'm 100% with you guys, and I'm looking at kind of his numbers and thinking about where he'll be this year, and if he's kind of 10 to 15 home runs, hitting around 280, scores about 80, 90 runs, drives in about 80 RBI. Like that's a guy that's I'm happy to have, but not necessarily going out of my way to get. And I might see other production that I'll know I can lock in, pass it up, wait a couple rounds, and go down to that Story or DeYoung or some of those guys, or even wait longer if it makes sense. And hope I can kind of at least make that similar production. And if he breaks out, he breaks out. But I just, like Damian said, I don't see that necessarily being in the cards. One quick thing, guys, and then we'll get out of here with our elite guys. Trey Turner, we're all comfortable putting him number one. We all think that his upside is incredible, but this is also a guy that has had injury issues, that is yet to play 100 games in the majors, 2 seasons hitting, 300 plate appearances, one almost to 450. Should we be as comfortable as we are, Damian?
I am. I have no issue with him. I think, again, he's still so young where it's just too early for me to say that he has some type of injury track record, especially when it comes from just getting hit by a pitch. I think it's one thing, where it's JD Martinez, like Ben said, who just struggles to run in a straight line without really stumbling or hitting something. When you do something like that, yeah, you're going to get hurt. But obviously we see with Turner that's not the case. So I'm totally fine with him. I'm actually I just like the way my team works out when I take Trey Turner early. And I mean, I've been taking him in the top half of the first in some mocks. I have no problem taking him as early as 4. And I just kind of like where I can go from there, knowing I have that base and steals and average and runs and can kind of focus on power and pitching in the next couple of rounds. So that's just me. I mean, I understand if you're still a little bit worried and you just don't like taking a guy in the first that you can't count on for 25 homers, but especially in Roto, it works for me. So I'm gonna be in support of that.
Yeah, I'm with you there too, and it was nice seeing him. He came back in September, had 100 at bats, looked good with the bat, stole bases, looked kind of back to where he was. So for me, I'm perfectly fine, but I think it is a question worth being raised. Ben, are you in agreement? Is he a guy you're comfortable taking kind of near the top where he's going?
I just looked, and I kind of assumed when I hear people talk about his injury history that he also got injured in 2016, and he actually didn't. So he played 83 games in the AAA, to which he had 371 plate appearances, and then he had 324 in the majors. So across the two, he stole 58 bases. So that was an injury hit season. Last year was, and again, you're right, Damian, I remembered the strained right hamstring, but I didn't remember that the first one was a fractured wrist. So actually, if you take the fractured wrist out of it and you look at the fact that actually his strained right hamstring came on the 5th of September, he actually isn't an injury that's caused necessarily by his style. Now, if this year we start to see more hamstring strains, more strains like that, then it might be a to do with his speed, and you might find that they limit him a little bit on the base paths. But I still think 40 plus steals kind of feels like something you can pencil in and expect even more. So I agree that I'd be happy to take him in the top half of the first round. And I think if you take him in the top half of the first round and it blows up in your face, at least you went for it. You went for I want to say the home run, but that's not strictly true. But you went for it, and you were trying to set yourself up best to win. And it's not like you were playing it safe. So I think definitely you can take him where his ADP is and feel good about it, and then not have to chase steals for a while.
100%. And steals were very important to a lot of people winning leagues last year. And with power becoming more plentiful, steals are very important. So, he could be a guy that wins a league. And if you take him, in the top, 5 picks, I'm perfectly fine with that. All right, Damian, it was awesome to have you back. Make sure you are following him on Twitter at D_bro1389. Check out, he did a mock with some of the ESPN guys, really good. 10 team just gives you some ideas of where players are coming off the board, how fast pitchers are coming, all that good stuff. For Ben Rolfe, I'm Kyle Robert, and we'll be back soon.